Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. And thank you for joining us this evening for our Dia de los Muertos community conversations, variations on tradition. My name is Joy Davis, and I am the manager of community engagement here at the Walters Art Museum. Today, I have the pleasure of welcoming local artist Jessy Desantis and also Edgar Reyes in conversation that is connected to our annual celebration. I'd like to thank a few of our sponsors, PNC, who sponsor our festival year to year, as well as individual donors, foundations, corporations, and grants from the City of Baltimore, Maryland State Arts Council, citizens of Baltimore County and Howard County government, and Howard County Arts Council. Please note that this program is being recorded and will be available both on our YouTube channel and on our Facebook page. I want to welcome and encourage you to explore the museum this Saturday, October 30th, by visiting our auditorium to view a screening of the wonderful work of Baez de mi Tierra, and also on our sculpture court to view our community altar designed by Edgar Reyes, who we're going to be in conversation with today. That will last from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. On Saturday on October 30th. You can contribute to the altar by writing notes to loved ones, friends, and community members. Again, I want to just welcome Jessy and Edgar here with us. Jessy Desantis was raised in a Nicaraguan household in Miami, Florida, and currently resides in Baltimore. Jessy is a self-taught and emerging artist creating meaningful, vibrant work. Her paintings, stark contrast of vibrant color and white space, draws the viewer into her subjects. She is inspired by her connection to nature, family, and her Central American roots. Her paintings are more than just visually beautiful. They carry on their intention with a story to be told. She seeks to pass on these stories of heritage and truth with all of its complexities to her children and future generations. Welcome, Jessy. Edgar Reyes is a Baltimore multimedia artist who creates work that reflects his personal experience as an undocumented youth in the United States. He nurtures the development of youth-driven, arts-based leadership initiatives that illustrate how art and design thinking can assist in self-expression and easing of cultural tensions. His practice highlights the beauty of being Mexican-American, yet questions his national and cultural traditions. Like other Chicano artists, he challenges social norms to bring forth awareness of what it means to be Latino. I just again want to welcome you both to the program, and I will hand it off to Edgar to start us off with the questions.
Thank you, Joy. Thank you for welcoming us both to the space. I first wanted to kind of kick off our event and our conversations today just to recognize the fact that we are an indigenous land, and we are on land that people have lived here before us. So I wanted to take a moment just to recognize that we are a Piscataway Indian Nation land. Thank you. I've been really fortunate for the past couple of years to be asked to take part in creating conversations and creating art pieces to reflect my culture and also the tradition of Dia de los Muertos. I really enjoyed being able to kind of just take a moment and reflect on the Walters collection, but also my own culture and what that kind of encompasses. And it's been really beautiful just to see just people's responses to the work and also to contribute to the work. And for this year, I really wanted to really engage in some of the loss that a lot of us have dealt with, in particular the loss of some family members in my family. And I'll share a little bit more about it later. But I think that's mainly what our conversation is going to be about today is the idea of loss and this idea of how do we celebrate loss and cherish those moments that we had with people. So I'm going to hand it over just to Jessy and give Jessy a chance to share about her work and some of the traditions that her family has celebrated over the past couple of years.
Thank you, Edgar. I love your work. Excited to see the altar in person at the Walters Museum. So I was raised in Miami, and my roots are from Nicaragua. I'm self-taught. I started painting 3 years ago, and a lot of what manifested in my artwork was where my identity and where I come from. And really, at the same time, I was researching more about my Central American roots, being from Nicaragua, and what that meant racially, ethnically, culturally. So here is a portrait of my abuelita. She migrated from Nicaragua to New York. And then on the right is a portrait. I call it a self portrait, but it's of my stoop here in Baltimore. And my art blends a sense of place, right? But also this sense of belonging, where I use elements of magical realism, uh, depicting my Central American roots, but also just residing here in Baltimore. And also the shared community here with the Mexican and Salvadoran and Central American communities that are here in Baltimore. And so for us in Nicaragua, I grew up hearing about Dia de los Muertos, and it's a lot of it, like what people know is, oh, it's from Mexico. It's from Mexico, and you don't really hear about Central America and the traditions outside of Mexico. But in Nicaragua, we do celebrate Dia de los Muertos, and we call it Dia de los Difuntos. Um, yeah, so that's a little bit about me. um, and Edgar, you have a question for me?
Yeah, I do. For me, my art plays such a significant role in just like sharing my history and also like my lived reality. And I think that's what a lot of people really appreciate also about your work. So my question for you is, how has your practice, helped you connect with others?
Can you repeat that one more time? I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah. How, how has your practice helped you connect with others?
With other folks in the
Other
community?
folks in the community or
Oh my
other
gosh, yeah.
artists? Yeah.
Yes. So I think social media and just researching my roots and sharing that, what I found, connecting with other Nicaraguans and Central Americans. Um, my paintings, like though like I speak from my perspective, it's very much like just painting what I know, and to find that there's just so many common um, themes in my artwork throughout the community, where it's like, oh, let's talk about European beauty standards, right? And how that's affected us negatively. And I like spoke through that with my abuela's portrait. And then having, family members, but also just folks who follow me on social media, like, yeah, I've dealt with this my whole life. I didn't like my nose. Now I know this is an indigenous, feature, and I appreciate it and I love it and I embrace it. But I grew up, here. And I'd like the audience to know that I'm from the diaspora, meaning that I was raised here, though culturally in my house, in my home, it was Nicaraguan and Salvadorian. I still am very much outside the culture in some ways in the culture. Um, and I guess you can say that phrase where it's like, no soy de aquí, ni soy de allá. I'm not from here, I'm not from there. It's like an in between. But just to keep that in mind. So I had to relearn a lot about where I come from to understand. And it's shared throughout the community.
And I think with your pieces, like with mine, we like to. I can speak for myself. I like to kind of hide little, kind of like Easter eggs in a sense, like but that people like start realizing, oh, there's like history there, and you can, you know, I know I've talked with you when you came over to my studio, and just, you know, our love for history and kind of uncovering these truths in essence as we're teaching ourselves, you know, these histories that have intentionally and purposely been hidden from the rest of, you know, the world. I'm hoping you can share a little bit about kind of your family. I think in the next slide you have a little bit more about some of your family's traditions and some of your experiences kind of celebrating Dia de los Muertos.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So what's pictured is myself as a baby. My mother is holding me, and I'm with my great-grandmother in Managua, Nicaragua. And on the right is a photo of my great-grandmother's mother and our family taken in the 1960s at a cemetery. So I think one of the big differences, and I've had to ask my mom, she's here in Baltimore too, about the tradition and how it was celebrated in Nicaragua. And I'm asking as an adult because growing up, we didn't make altars. Altars at home is something I believe is Mexican. But this is pretty unfortunate. But as we migrated to Miami, we lost a lot of tradition because it was our tradition to bring flowers and to bring food and to clean the tombstones, the cemetery where your loved ones are. So you would physically go and spend the day, have a picnic. And obviously, when you migrate, you don't have the dead with you, right? So we never put up altars. And I grew up believing that Dia de los Muertos was a Mexican holiday, not realizing that my family celebrated it in our cultures. And in Nicaragua, I've learned that the Nahua people in Mexico migrated as far the south to Nicaragua. And so a lot of our land masses, like volcanoes or mountains or lakes, their original names are in Nahuatl. So with the language, the culture throughout Nicaragua and up north, you know, through El Salvador, these traditions, these indigenous traditions were practiced and are still practiced today.
What are some traditions that, you know, you want to continue, or that you wish you want to start maybe creating with your family, you know, centered around this idea of celebrating life and celebrating loved ones? What are, you know, now as a, you know, it's weird to think about it now as adults, like what's something that you want to start maybe, you know, planting that seed maybe with your family?
Absolutely. I have 2 daughters, and we have already started making altars. Last year I grew corn, and at harvest we grabbed the corn husk and dipped them in ink, made flowers, added those flowers made out of corn husks to our altars. We add offerings of food for our loved ones. So it's something my daughter, she's 7, my older daughter, she already knows, like, okay, we're going to set up an altar. But it's also something that we just don't do once a year, but we do it multiple times a year, honoring our ancestors, whether it's like a birthday or a passing of, you know, we've had recent passings, you know, they know to continue that tradition. And I'm proud, and I love that we're continuing it, because I didn't do that growing up, and it's so nice to reconnect, and it feels very good. I always felt like I had a connection with the dead, and it's something you don't speak about, but it's very natural. It came natural to me, speaking to my ancestors. Yeah, so we're continuing. Something else that I learned is the day before Dia de los Muertos, Dia de los Angelitos, which is, have you heard of that, Edgar?
Yeah, I got a chance to hang out with my mom, so we're sharing
Talking
that.
about it.
Yeah, we're
I'd
sharing.
love to hear more about that too. I was just learning about it, but then I asked my mother, and she's like, "Yeah, we celebrate also the passing of children. You know, the children who died young. They have their own day, and we commemorate them." And I was like, "Wow, okay." So that is done in Nicaragua too. So your mother came and your family came to see the altar. How was that?
Yeah, that was a lot. It's like trying to, hold in a lot of emotions. Here, I'll pull up the next slide. We can see the piece. Well, in my family, we recently, a big loss in our family was my grandfather. He passed away this past January. And the image you see actually on the left is an altar that was created actually not for Dia de los Muertos, not for Dia de los Difuntos, but it was like uh, as we were celebrating his life right after he had passed away. I was fortunate enough to be able to travel to Mexico and be there with my family. And I started realizing those connections, like you mentioned already, these hybrid traditions that nobody really talked about, but they're there. And I feel like it's a form of resistance to some extent. And also it's a way of assimilation that the church kind of forced upon people. And even there, like mourning my grandfather with the image on the left, I started asking questions. I'm like, what is that? Like that white dust cross that's underneath like the altar? And they're like, oh, it's cal. I was like, cal. And I started like connecting all these dots, started Googling stuff. And they're like, yeah, it's just like limestone. I was like, ah. And limestone, I think if it's the right mineral that I'm thinking of, it's a bonding agent, but it also like helps with like nutritional value also within different indigenous communities throughout what is now called like Latin America, right? Uh, and with tortillas, like tortillas are made like the way the corn is processed, so like we can actually consume it as people. Like it's using this cal. But it's also this idea of trying to guide, and I'm spacing out on the term, but trying to guide the spirit to not be stuck here. In essence, to guide the spirit to go to its final destination. And it's kind of mixing the indigenous beliefs, but also like the Catholicism, because Mexico is very, very Catholic, and a lot of our traditions are based on Catholicism, at least with my family. So visiting the altar, it's the piece on the right. It's an image of a piece that I actually created, like the key image that I created as my, in essence, like the last couple weeks of my grandfather's life, not knowing that. So when I was hanging up this piece, like that was really emotional because like I just like found out that he had just passed away and this piece had just been made and it was being hung. So as soon as that happened, I was like, okay, well, if I get asked again to be part of the Walters, the celebration, I was like, I know what I'm going to display, but I wasn't too sure what the piece would look like. And something that's really helped me, like, not just process the loss of my grandfather, but just process just different emotions, is just enjoying nature. And I think we can relate with that a lot. I think that's kind of the first time we met on a hike, I think. And just realizing that, nature is for everyone and we all belong there. And the more time I've spent in nature and been able to travel to different parts, even here in the US, I've started realizing that a lot of the trails that we go on were originally created by indigenous communities, and they just got like a different name, usually like some old white guy now. But sunsets have become such like a cliche, like treasure the moment sort of thing. And one of my favorite memories that I still remember like super vividly is the last time I got to go to my family's farm in Mexico, in Guadalajara, just outside of the city, and sitting in a pickup truck with my grandfather and his oldest son. And as we were driving away, just a sunset. So for me, like I was like, I have to show that, and I have to like depict that in the gallery. And to be honest, I wasn't sure how it was going to turn out. It's like one of those things where I like had some really odd idea, and I was like, I'm not sure. I created it digitally because I like do a lot of mixed media stuff, and ended up really, really beautiful. And it's really interesting how like coincidences in life happen. Like, when this piece was just being finished, the piece of my grandfather, it was like towards the end of his life. And then when I finished installing this, like the next day, there's this like beautiful sunset that looked exactly the same as like the piece that I created. So, there's something there. I'm not sure what it is, that something, some sort of other being is always there. So for me, it was a lot when my family showed up and we were in that space together. And also the fact that my mom was posting it on social media. And because of the pandemic, like it's just like our families have become more connected. So one of my uncle, actually the one that was there for that sunset, he's like, it threw me off. He's like, I like teared up. He's like, I never tear up. And I was like, we gotta deal with our emotions. We can't just, we can't just hide them. That's sort of what I wanted to talk about with some of these next slides. Is just the fact that we have so many connections with so much of the work that's being shown in different museums, even at the Walters, and just these emotional connections that just like take us back. Like I remember a couple of years ago when I had the chance to look at some of the archives or some of the collection of the Walters, and remember seeing this burial urn. And actually, you mentioned it already. Our people, our ancestors. We moved and we traveled, and these borders didn't exist. And when I saw this piece, I was just like, whoa, that's literally me. And like, I kept it to myself, but like I had to take a moment, because I also knew that this urn, somebody important to somebody, was in essence their remains were curled up and put in this piece, and realizing that for whatever reason, and I'll share it a little bit, and now it exists here in Baltimore, but I was just connected with it. And once I started reading the description, I was like, it wasn't from Mexico, it was from Guatemala. But for me, I was like, oh, there's just imaginary borders now, but like that's our people, right? These Mexicas and these Nahuatl people, right?
Right.
And that was another question I had for you before I share a little bit more about the Walters is, the Nahuatl is like a group of languages that's spoken by different native communities just throughout Mexico, like you said, and all throughout Central America as well. What role for you has Nahuatl played in now your art practice and kind of learning the language or discovering the fact that you've even been speaking it and not realizing it?
Oh, that's great. Yeah. Through researching food, a lot of our food, like for us, green peppers are called chiltomas, and just researching foods and realizing like, well, this name is different. Like it's not a Spanish name. Like where does it come from? What's the etymology? And finding that, oh, it's Nahuatl. And it starts there, right? And it just keeps going. So I am learning Nahuatl. I guess it's been over a year now. But through learning language, you learn culture. And that's the reason why the Catholic Church and the Spanish Crown committed ethnocide, essentially, which is a destruction of culture through language primarily, where they use a mix of Spanish and Nahuatl to lose so many indigenous languages. So Nahuatl, I think there's 16 different varieties of Nahuatl spoken. And the Nahuatl spoken in Nicaragua is still spoken on an island called Ometepet. or Ometepe, which means Ome, two, and Tepet, mountain, so two mountains. Yeah, so it plays a role. It is all interconnected because through this collective that I'm learning Nahuatl, I'm also learning about religion. I'm learning about practices and food that are so, and it's Mexican based, but it's so similar to what we do in Nicaragua and like the language that we speak in Nicaragua, which is a Spanish Nahuatl combination. I'm reading a lot of books now, just focusing on Nicaragua because it's not just Nahuatl. There were so many other indigenous languages, like from different tribes, right? But the Nahuatl people had this large empire, so you hear about it more, you know, with the Mexica and how far south they migrated and how well known they are.
Thank you. Yeah, and I'm always learning, and just like you were saying, and something that really recently, like, I guess reaffirmed, but also just kind of like blew me away as well, is like the impact of like globalization throughout like the Americas has impacted like the way we look as well. In that sense, like the construction of the Panama Canal and like the migration of like Jamaicans, and also the slave trade, and like there's like, in essence, communities that have existed as like freed slaves like in Honduras for like longer than here in the US. And just for me, like learning that, and also just hearing from like people that are part of that diaspora that are like currently living and breathing, in essence, historians that have this living, breathing history. And recently I had that experience with a new coworker of mine, and she's like, you're not sure, would you just started like, I love talking to people about history. And she just like like, I was like, oh my gosh, I was like, just share everything. And I was just like a sponge, just like she was sharing like all this beautiful traditions of this like intermixing of like these indigenous African and European traditions that were just blended in there, especially where the, you know, that part of Honduras where her family was from, that, you know, all three of those were like clearly seen in the way she presented herself.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, I wanted to this next image is something that also like threw me off when I started discovering this stuff. The fact that these artifacts that we see in museums are literally taken from graves, and like that just like really messes with me. The fact that somebody, in essence, you know, would loot somebody's gravesite. This is, I believe, in the Natural History Museum in New York when I came across this, and just realizing the fact that people, in essence, even now, just feel really entitled and feel like they're preserving culture. And I always like, are you? Or like bringing stuff like they have the right to like do this. So I think with my work, I'm like constantly just unpacking this or trying to for myself, and sometimes it helps other people, but it's really, I think at the end of the day, it's just trying to get me to process it, because I've gotten to the point now where like I have to take a moment every time I like see a piece. Like recently I was in Birmingham, and like I was like, what is a piece doing here in Birmingham? Just like, what is the piece doing here in Baltimore? And I just, you know, I'm like doing like, in essence, just meditating in front of the piece, just taking a few seconds to myself, just to honor the fact that this was somebody, and usually it was somebody really important to that community, because they went out of their way to like, in essence, bury them with these really precious artifacts, or these really precious mementos. Also with some of these, I'm going to click through the next one. You know, some of these are urns that are here in Baltimore, not just in other places. And for me, that's what a lot of my work now is digging into, is just like seeing and finding these really interesting things that aren't being displayed, and finding out their history and how they got there. And just, I really enjoy like some of the pattern work and some of the intricacy, I've also been fortunate enough to be able to travel back to Mexico and realizing how like this is still like a money making thing for people, which is so weird. Just the fact that like people are still being opportunistic of taking and in essence looting these things. And it's not just, you know, other people coming into the countries, but people within the country. So I'm like trying to figure out what all that means. And I think with some of my more recent work, I'm really kind of digging into that, just really trying to unpack. Again, I think I mentioned it earlier, like the globalization, and also like this like ecotourism that's like super popular right now. I think we see it with like companies like Airbnb and Vrbo, just like people selling experiences that I've also paid for, and I'm like, did I just do that? But like, like it was convenient. And yeah, let me show you this next image, and I'm interested in see. I have some questions for you.
Sure.
Yeah, on the left, this is a piece that I've been exhibiting since 2018. It's actually really, really big. It's about like, I think it's like 12 feet, the whole piece. You're only seeing like maybe 4 or 5 feet of it. And just thinking about, you know, these artifacts, thinking about also the role that also like we play when we maybe get to a chance to visit, but then also like the fact that for a lot of these communities, like this is a source of income, and for a lot of them, they see it as like a way to like make a living. And I've also, like you, I've been realizing that the Spanish that I speak is not like European Spanish. It's a mixture. And I've been starting to grow things. And like on my roof here in Baltimore, I grow marigolds or cempasúchils. And I don't grow cactuses. I do, but they're not the ones that carry cochineal. And just thinking about like the colors, and that's been such a big impact in like the colors that I choose with my work as well. And I think a lot of it's like subconscious. Like as I'm learning my history and learning about things, I'm like, oh, like you can get these beautiful yellows, these beautiful oranges. And then with cochineal, those are those little bugs that you see on the cactus leaves. The fact that you get these like purples and reds. But yeah, this is just kind of where I'm at, I think, and which is great if we like share our practice in the same city, that we just indirectly but very directly we're like cross-pollinating in essence ideas and mindsets. Yeah.
And I have to say, I love the colors. They're so bright, and a lot of my work has a lot of vibrant colors too. I think it reflects a lot of the colors that we see in, you know, our homelands, right? Like the cempasúchil and the bugs on the cactus. Or for me, it's birds, you know, the colorful birds. Yeah. And then like going back to tourism, it's unfortunate, but I think it's that it stems from, right, it's like neo-colonization basically. And a lot of it are the countries surviving like in a capitalistic society, you know, and participating. So like in Nicaragua, tourism is a big moneymaker now, but that also forces like a lot of homogenization of and like kind of like stereotyping yourselves, you know, and like packaging it for tourists, right? So and that also like goes into nationalism, at least in Nicaragua, where it's like everybody can identify with El Huehuense, which is a indigenous play, right? But it's like, well, hold on, there's so many different indigenous cultures, you know, but it's like, well, we're all Nicaraguans now, you know, and that you know, that nationalism. And it's like, well, we, you know, have a lot of different cultures within Nicaragua. And when I talk about Nicaragua, I talk about being from West Nicaragua, which is the colonized portion of the country, because there are autonomous regions that are Afro-Indigenous and Indigenous on the East Coast, that are outside of, the national, what people know as Nicaragua. the borders, as you say. But yeah, just throwing that in there.
Yeah, I think it's like, I mean, we see it here. People like don't realize like what we indigenous people or Native Americans here in the U.S. are like living and breathing people, just like us. Like we don't have, a direct association with the tribal community. At least I don't, but I still consider myself indigenous. And then people don't realize, like in Mexico, that was like just like everywhere else in the world. It was like strategically displacing and disconnecting people from their roots. But there are still people that have been able to still survive and still keep their culture thriving. And it's very interesting. Like the longer I've been able to spend time in Mexico, the more I realize that there are these, like, in essence, at least, these nomadic tribes that still exist in Mexico that still move throughout, that have intentionally like not assimilated. And then you also have movements like the Zapatistas that are all about empowering women and just being anti-nationalist, anti-government, and gets into all these layers of things as to things that we're seeing all around the world of decentering ourselves from some of the forces that the government wants to do. I want to give you a little bit of time just to share some of the pieces that you came across at the Walters from where you are in the world, right, and your connection, and also some of the work you're doing.
Sure. So this is when you brought up burial urns, I was like, oh, I didn't know the Walters had burial urns. These are burial urns from Nicaragua, and they're shaped like a womb. So for me, I see it as like a returning to the earth and returning to the land. This, death not being the end, right? But cyclical, because essentially I believe that we are the land and that we are connected and we're not separate from the land. And you say nature, like the universe spoke with you with the sunsets, which is so beautiful. But that connection, like we can't really separate ourselves from where we are from, and that's the earth, right? So these burial urns, I had a vision of myself in one. And I think the topic of death is like very taboo. And it's like, what? You saw yourself what? And it's like, yeah, because I don't really fear something like death, because and this is like my grounding mantra, and I tell myself this when I feel anxious with the society we live in, and expectations and all this social pressures, that I tell myself that I am the land, and I was here before, and I will be here after. There is no end. There's only cycles of change. So this is what a burial urn looks like from Nicaragua, and these were probably unearthed. And I believe I'm not sure. I think these are still in Nicaragua. These urns are in a museum in Nicaragua. And then on the next slide is a sketch of myself. And this is like my next large painting. This is the concept for it. So essentially returning to the earth. And I think it's also very symbolic, because not just physically returning to earth, but also just remembering where you're from, where your ancestors are from, and like how important the land is, and how we need to protect it, and we need to protect our indigenous communities. I don't see myself as indigenous. I instead say I'm of indigenous descent. And that's just me personally, because I am multiracial, and I feel like indigenous communities today that are not colonized are fighting to continue, whereas I am like of the diaspora, reconnecting with my roots, but also participating in a way in this colonial structure, if not, surviving as we all are in this colonial capitalistic structure that we live in systems. And yes, that's what I'm going to be working on in the future, hopefully soon. Yeah.
I'm excited to see what it ends up looking like at the end and what colors. Like in my mind, I'm already just like, dropping colors in. I'm like, that would be cool. What would the background look like if you would include patterns? And like, where would you, start including some of your very subtle but not so subtle, hints towards different parts of your roots.
Right. Like that magical realism.
Yeah.
Element. Yeah. Symbols, right?
Yeah.
That's how we tell our stories through our paintings with these like little, what do you call them? Eggs? Little hidden.
I just call them like Easter eggs. I was just thinking of just Disney. Disney loves to like hide little things everywhere.
Yeah.
I think for me, it's also just like the power of language and the power of like being able to write history and share history through writing has a lot of power and a lot of like control. And creating imagery and creating like visuals has been a way to like resist that and to educate people who have intentionally been excluded from education. So for me, that's like the power of of your art in particular, is that like, and with mine as well, is just being able to, continue to honor that has continued to be a part of the legacy that people have left, before us. And some of those open air schools that were happening all throughout the early 1900s and still continue today through some of the more rural communities throughout Latin America to, in essence, provide resources and to provide free and accessible education to everybody. And art plays such a big role in just like connecting us and being able to share like we have power and we can use this power. I also I have a question. I'm gonna keep tabs on the comments just to see. I think there's already one question, but my question for you before we go into reading some of the people's questions, since we're we were just on your art, is my question, and I can answer this as well. What made you want to become an artist?
Oh, I've been drawing forever. And I actually went into the accounting field because art wasn't an option. Like I grew up in an immigrant community. It wasn't something you do or something that my family like, lived through Civil War and you got out. They didn't come here and then like, oh, you can like become an artist. It's like that is not, gonna make some income. And so I had these ideas and like I guess through the education system and what the American dream is and propaganda and like, oh, you need to do this like to be successful. This is the idea of success. So I went into accounting and then worked long hours, had children, and began to feel very unfulfilled. And I always loved the arts and realizing that this is something that I want to pursue. I feel like it's also therapeutic for me, but it's a way to tell my story and it's a way to share history, and it's very much has been fulfilling, and I'm very privileged to pursue it now, and I want others to know that they can pursue it as well. How about you, Edgar?
Gosh, I think I'll give you like a long but short answer. I think being an artist or calling myself an artist is like a sense of privilege, and sometimes like I feel like I don't know. It's like weird to call myself an artist, even though I am, right? Because there's so many other people that have so much talent that for whatever reason aren't able to, either it be because they have to work and do some other stuff, or they have to take care of loved ones, so they're left with no time and no ability to share their skills. But I think for me, it's using that privilege that I've been afforded to share my story. and kind of goes with the one of the questions that somebody already put on here with Jasmine, I believe. The question was like, when we were like talking about like just tourism and like helping the like how that's like dealing with the economy, like how do we kind of deal with like the monetizing of our work and making pieces that are just for us? And I think that's what my practice is right now. Like art is kind of like not a hustle, but it's just like me expressing myself. And like I have multiple hustles, and I make art not to make money, but to tell my story. Because if I don't make it, nobody's going to tell my story, in essence, from my perspective. And that's kind of where I'm in right now with my art. I've also done a lot of community-based work where I've been fortunate enough to get grants. But something that I've kind of sat back and reflected on with some of those more, I guess, public pieces, it's like I don't want to be opportunistic of other people's experiences. And I really, if I'm going to be asking people to be vulnerable, I need to be vulnerable. So that's why a lot of my pieces, even the stuff that's here on display at the Walters, like I started trying to like, people have asked me, and like I've been asked to be in like, shows where like my work then gets donated, and like that's kind of the work that I kind of like doing. But at the end of the day, I don't make work to sell. And a lot of people are like, wait, what? No, like, yeah. I was like, I get asked to do projects, even, sometimes with museums or with different institutions. And sometimes what I get compensated actually just circles back into my art. And it's just like being able to like sustain that practice. So I think for me to answer that question, it's just like, I'm now making art in essence to tell my story and to kind of reflect, as part of my story is like learning these things and becoming aware of different things, like we were talking about earlier with tourism and the impact that it's having in different communities. Before I forget though, if you all drink mezcal, you should look up a little bit of the impact that mezcal is having on some of the different communities, especially in Oaxaca, and the fact that we're over consuming it to the point that it's these the biodiversity and the agave plants, these wild agave plants, are being lost, and to the point where they might not even exist. And also the prices of mezcal there regionally is so expensive that the different communities there can't use it for like celebrations, especially dealing when somebody has passed away, or even with happier, or I guess with like weddings, where there in Oaxaca in particular, like that's a big thing, like multiple day wedding sort of thing, where everybody is using mezcal as more of a traditional like ceremonial purposes. So yeah, we don't have enough time to like dig into more of that, but y'all are welcome to reach out to me regarding that. But yeah, be aware of where your mezcal comes from, and how you're consuming it. But Jessy, do you want to answer that question that was asked?
Yeah, I think about this a lot. I mean, I think capitalism's like a major source of like my depression, and like trying to survive in like a capitalistic society, and then having to monetize my work like is like a really awful feeling for me, dreadful even. And when I started painting, I was not painting to sell because I still have these paintings. They're large scale. They took a lot of time. And I mean, I was painting at night because that's the only time I had. I had a baby, I had a 4-year-old. It was 3-year-old, no, 4-year-old at the time. So I was a full-time parent, really, and then painting at night. So I put a lot of energy into them. They mean a lot to me. They're very personal pieces, and I still have them. Like my, portrait of family members. It's like, very personal, like stories that are attached to them. And I just had an artist talk at Motor House, and this question came up, like, how do you, like, you're an artist, how do you make money, kind of thing. And as of recent, I started making watercolors. like smaller scale and 100% like therapeutically. Like I needed to change pace. I needed to create without feeling any pressures of having to like exploit myself, exploit my culture, you know? Like I want to paint something beautiful that I feel spiritually connected with without having to tell a story, you know? I just want to live, right? And fortunately, these watercolors have like are smaller. I make them faster, and I could sell them. So it's just working out that way right now. But I'm giving myself breaks, you know. I think it's very important to rest because we do live in hustle culture, and everything is monetized and capitalized, and it's unfortunate. And it's something that I personally have to fight against.
Yeah, I think, yeah, that kind of relates back to what I was saying. Like I'm an educator. I work at the collegiate level, and that's my full-time hustle. But I'm constantly like making commitments to like do speaking arrangements or to present and do workshops. And yeah, I'm trying to find that balance, Jesse. I don't think I have an answer, but I do have a question for you. I think kind of relating to that. I think right now there is this kind of this renaissance in essence, right? The lack of a better word of people, you know, POC people just wanting to share our story. What advice do you have for someone who is looking to pursue art and to become an artist and maybe just see it as a career option for them?
I would probably give this advice. I think authenticity is very important. And when I was in high school, I had a literature teacher tell me that you have to write what you know, right? And I translated that into art. So like I paint what I know, you know, and I don't really go off of that because like it's authentic, right? And there's passion behind it. There, like if you're pursuing art, you know, what moves you? What are you passionate about? What can you speak to? You know, where you're not speaking for someone else, you know, like really just focusing on that. But like at the same time, I see art as because like I tend to like focus inward, right, with art, with history. But I love all kinds of art, and art is so broad. Like it could be really anything. So it might not apply to everyone, and depending on what kind of art they're pursuing, whether it's photography or dance, you know. But that's what I have.
Yeah, I think with me, what I've started kind of also because I teach, I'm just telling students like there's no right or wrong path, right? Not everybody's journey is going to look the same, and sometimes it's really hard. I even catch myself like comparing myself and like being like, oh my gosh, like I want to be able to do that, or how can I do that? And it's not healthy. And sometimes it's really hard to put social media down, right? Like just turn it off, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because sometimes, at least for me, like in my brain, I'm just like constantly doing that. So I have to like catch myself, and I also have to remind students like it's okay if your journey is like all over the place, kind of like a river, right? When we look at a river, it's like finding its place, finding how it can like follow these different obstacles in the landscape. Eventually, it finds its way where it wants to go, but it's not going to follow the most straight, the most direct path, right? And I on that note too is like, don't give up. If this is your dream, like you will hopefully find the right community or the right network of people that will continue to feed you, spiritually and emotionally, to just support you and in your journey. But those haters help me out though. Like, just give me fuel. They give me fuel, and I had some of those. Unfortunately, with some educators, along my way that were those haters, and I think it's just like, I'm like, all right, I'm just cool. Like, yeah, I'm gonna do it, and I'm gonna prove to you that I can succeed and I can do this. So it's always cool to look back and think about those people, but that's my advice. Is like, there's no right journey, and there's no like direct path. There's not like no
Yes.
equation to get you there.
Yes, I agree 100%. It's going to look different for everyone. Like, I'm a mother, that what my art career is going to look like and how I got here is going to be different for someone who's single, who doesn't have kids, or older, younger. So yeah, I agree. There's no one way.
Yeah. Well, I want to invite, people that are joining us or maybe rewatching this is, go visit the Walters. If you haven't had a chance to, maybe get a chance to check out the altar, maybe create a note or bring a picture to maybe contribute to this, or just walk around. You might find inspiration in something that you didn't realize was there. And support local Baltimore artists. Right? We're amazing. And, we talked about our hustles, but, maybe somebody out there maybe wants to be our patron, maybe wants to commission us. So just reach out. Reach out to us during social media, especially if those of you that maybe have questions and maybe want to engage with us one-on-one. I can speak for myself. I'm pretty open and I'm pretty available, especially if you are local, to maybe have a very informal conversation. So thank you everyone for joining us. Jessy, do you want to say some last few words?
I want to thank you, Edgar. This was a great talk. Thank you to the Walters Art Museum for creating the space. I look forward to seeing the altar. And we all have ancestors. We all come from the land. And just take time to take a break, rest, reflect, and get back in nature. And thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you to the Walters as well. Thank you so much for providing us with this platform.